Today on Biblical Higher Ed Talk, I sit down with Bruce Hoeker, Executive Director of the Association of Business Administrators of Christian Colleges, to discuss effective CFO leadership. CFOs are uniquely positioned to provide critical fiscal information that drives organizational decision-making. Thank you for tuning in today. I'm your host, Philip Dearborn, President of the Association for Biblical Higher Education, and we are honored to have as our guest this week, Bruce Hoeker. Bruce is the Executive Director of the Association for Business Administrators of Christian Colleges, and for the sake of me not having to say that 20 times during this podcast, we're just going to call it ABACC for the rest of the show. And if you're in biblical higher education or Christian higher education, you'll certainly recognize that name of ABACC. And I've invited Bruce in to talk about the unique role CFOs play in an organization. Effective CFOs don't just report the numbers. They play a critical role in leadership teams making the best decisions. So, Bruce, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Fantastic. So we'll get into the weeds of CFO talk here in a second, but just so our audience can get to know you just a bit, talk to us about a defining moment in your life that kind of shaped you, propelled you forward to where you're sitting now as the executive director of ABACC.
Sure. Well, I started out my career right off the bat in business. I always knew I wanted to be in business, whatever that meant as a youngster. And I went to school to get a business degree, and I started working in business. My main goal really at that young age was I just wanted to be wealthy. And so I thought, I'm just going to do something to make sure that I'm wealthy. And that I thought was my ultimate goal. And I started out in business, and I was very successful. I moved very quickly. I worked for a couple of companies back to back that put me in a wonderful position personally and financially. And I found that it was terribly unfulfilling. And I just felt like I missed the mark someplace. And I really wasn't sure how that happened. But in the job that I had prior to my role in higher ed, I thought, I just feel like I need to do something for somebody besides myself. Yeah. And I started looking around for jobs that were maybe a little more meaningful, that I could use my skills, but maybe they would be put to better use. I opened my church bulletin one day, and there was a CFO role in a Christian college, and I thought, that's it. That's the one. So I went and got it. I got that job, and I've been here ever since.
Wow. How about that? That's fantastic. So you used a term there that we have a lot of younger listeners. So you may have to define exactly what a church bulletin is.
Oh, goodness. Yeah. I'm not sure. Now, do they exist anymore? I'm not even sure. There used to be the order of service in a printed piece of paper with announcements. We don't have that anymore.
We don't. I went to a church growing up, and there was always the fancy inspirational photograph on the front cover of it, right? Every week it was different, but that's cool. That's neat. And I think, I look around at how a lot of our institutions have business majors, and they're very generic in preparing people to go into the business context. Mm-hmm. And such a neat story of what you thought in an unfulfilled, okay, is this really what it's all about? Mm-hmm. And God used that to shape to where you are today. And you've just done a phenomenal job of leading ABACC. And I must say, when I first became president of ABACC, now almost 4 years and 2 months ago, the very first person that reached out to welcome me to the seat was you. So we've enjoyed a great relationship over the last 4 years. So you've effectively led ABACC. While it's been a while since you've sat in that CFO seat, you've certainly been around CFOs. All of your content that you create on your website, all of the conferences that you have, webinars that you have, are all geared towards helping CFOs flourish. What do you observe as some of the best practices today of CFOs within the Christian and Bible college context?
Well, you're right. I've been out of the trenches for a long time, 24 years now, but I spend all of my day thinking about the needs of Christian higher ed CFOs. And as I think about the CFOs that I work with, there's at least 3 qualities that I would say make a really good CFO. First of all, a good CFO has to have a competent team behind them. Hire good people. And we have a tendency in Christian higher ed or in the Christian world to be too nice. And we might have, our good friend that's working for us who's not doing that great of a job, but we don't want to let them go because we feel bad. We can be nice. We can be good Christians and be good business people. Yeah. So have a competent team. Make sure they have what they need to do their job. Don't expect them to do their job if you're not giving them the proper resources. Make sure your team is clear on your expectations and hold them accountable to it. That's the first thing. I would say also communicate well. Unfortunately, CFOs are often terrible communicators, generally, let alone communicating financial data. We love financial data. We love charts and graphs. Not always the best way to communicate. So communicate well, and make sure in that process that what you're communicating is clear and that it's being understood.
Which is actually, it's kind of an interesting tension, I think, that CFOs plays, because naturally they, like you said, and we're generalizing, that CFOs struggle sometimes in their communication capacity or ability, yet their words matter so much. They can sway a conversation very quickly with the information or how they're communicating information. Absolutely. So it's almost like practice before going in what exactly it is that you want to say.
Absolutely. And make sure it's clear. And if you don't know how to communicate well, learn. Get out there and learn how to do it.
Yeah.
I would say probably more important than anything else is to network, be connected. Unfortunately, I see many CFOs that are very isolated, they're very insular, their heads are down, they're super busy, and have a very difficult time keeping up because of the huge burden that we place on a CFO in Christian higher ed. Your network is absolutely critical.
Yeah. And part of the work of ABACC is to do just that, right?
Absolutely.
To create that network. Talk to us a little bit about some of what you've seen happen at your events, where that networking what's the value of networking?
Oh, sure. Well, we just completed our 65th annual conference this past February. We've been doing this for 65 years. I've been here for 24 years. We always do a survey after our conference, and every single year that I've been here, and I'm presuming every year since ABACC has ever been around, we always ask, essentially, why are you here? What's the value to you? Networking, absolutely number one. I know CFOs. I have a CFO right now that I've been working with whose institution was struggling badly, and the end was visible. And she got connected with the association through ABACC, actually. I don't know, somebody at ABACC recommended she come to ABACC. She learned so much so quickly and ramped up so quickly, essentially saved the institution. It was the business side of the institution that was truly failing. And she was able to fix so much partly because of the content that ABACC provides, but primarily because of the network she built. She had people she could talk to. There's nothing out there in higher ed that hasn't already been experienced. A lot of, especially CFOs, I feel like maybe think it's just me, it's just my problem. And it's not. All problems that we face in higher ed are universal, especially Christian higher ed. So building that network and being connected to others gives you a place to go for answers.
Yeah. And it's such a unique time in biblical and Christian higher education too. Both you and I have been around it for decades. And I don't think it's an overstatement to say we're just in some very unique days.
Oh, yeah.
And some of the struggles, institutional closures, are rarely closing because the faculty aren't great or the programs aren't great. We
can't run our businesses.
Exactly right. So that the office becomes a point of tension because of the financial burdens that our institutions are facing. So that kind of goes into the second question here, that CFOs are typically in that unique and I would say often difficult position. Much of their function is to report real-time financials with little to no control then over how and what spending occurs. What are some effective ways for CFOs to manage that tension? They know the reality. They're reporting the reality. They may sit at the C-suite, but they're not the sole decision maker. And sometimes they're seeing decisions made that they know the consequences of those decisions. So how do they manage that tension?
Well, it's a great question because it is a huge problem. And I have seen it done very, very poorly over the years, very poorly, to the demise of the institution. I would say I would come at this from a different way. And I know, Phil, you and I have talked about this in prior times, but I think a true CFO needs to figure out who they are and what their true role is. Yeah. There's a big difference between a CFO and a bookkeeper, which that bookkeeper is that reporter. And while that is absolutely a part of the CFO's job, reporting information, it is not where your mindset should be. So that tension that we have, I feel like, is often because we're in the wrong mindset. So I would dare say a true CFO, a good CFO who's actually doing a good job for their school, is more responsible for things like financial planning and strategy, both long and short term, projecting the financial needs based on data and demographics and information beyond the business office, interpreting data, interpreting trends, calculating trends for management and decision making, capital structures, institutional assets, managing lender and banking relationships, and that list goes on and on and on. Yeah. That's very different than reporting. Yeah. It's a bookkeeper's job to report, to print financial statements, to cut payroll checks. Unfortunately, in my 24 years, I have seen a lot of institutions and unfortunately a lot of presidents who get that backwards.
Yeah. So I was gonna ask. So what contributes to that? Okay, so maybe you're a CFO listening or you're a president listening. Why in some instances have we relegated or we see the CFO simply as a glorified bookkeeper that they're just reporting the numbers? Like what's contributing to that?
Small school mentality. Most presidents are not business professionals. Most presidents are academics. Yeah. And well, that's great. That's great. We often buck the idea that a Christian college is a business. We don't like that term, especially outside of the business office. I see a lot of presidents and academics who really don't like that idea. We're not a business, we're a ministry. Well, you are a ministry, but it's a business and it needs to run like a business. So often we're looking at, payroll checks have to be cut. I need a financial statement. We got to put together a budget. Yes, we need to do all of those things. That is not the ultimate job of a CFO and shouldn't be. And if it is, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah. So if presidents are listening, I think a good question to ask yourself is, are you permitting or giving permission to your CFO to truly play the function of the CFO and do some of the things that you've been talking about? Talk to the CFO who's in that seat that kind of is living in that tension. Are there practical things that they can do to try to ease that tension so that they can present themselves more than just that bookkeeper?
Sure. Oh, well, number one, I would say, first of all, when it comes to the reporting, you are the reporter, not the responsible party. So yes, you should be handling a budget process well. You should make sure that budget expectations are clear. It's often difficult to wrangle all of the departments in higher ed because they're not all run by business professionals who understand financial statements and budgets. And too often we hear the phrase, the Lord will provide. And my question is always, maybe he already did and you mismanaged it. So I would dare say, remember that you're the reporter, that you're not the responsible party. Be honest about it, good or bad. I've seen many presidents who felt like the budget looks terrible. We're in the red, but I'm embarrassed. It's my fault. I should manage things better. That's not always the case. And maybe some of it is. Maybe you need to be better at your job. And if that's the case, get better at your job, but don't forget your role.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic. And one good leadership axiom that I've lived by, and I would imagine CFOs could use this, is whenever you see a problem, obviously it's important that you're reporting the problem or the issue, but then also come prepared with solutions. And while it may not necessarily be the CFO's responsibility to carry out those solutions, some proactive thinking ahead of time to say, look, okay, this is our scenario. This is where we're in. What could some potential solutions be to that particular problem?
That goes back to strategy.
It does. And it's more like that proactive look. And our mindset, unfortunately, for the CFO always feels like it's backwards looking. Give us point in time today based off of what our past practice has been, not what the future looks like. And the CFO can earn some significant currency if they're constantly looking ahead.
And it's their job.
Exactly. Higher education is its unique animal. You already mentioned, we're a ministry or a not-for-profit. I always say, well, the only difference is we talk about revenue over expense instead of profit. Other than that, we're very similar to the business sector, but it is its own unique beast. And then layer in the fact that we're in Christian and biblical higher education as well. So talk to us about some of those similarities, differences between CFOs and higher education versus other business sectors, because I would imagine a lot of our institutions are hiring CFOs from outside the higher education context, and they kind of need help navigating some of those similarities.
Yeah, oh goodness. Yeah. Well, I would dare say, as far as the CFO role goes, there are more differences than similarities. The corporate CFO and the higher ed CFO are two very different animals, and I've been both, and I've gone through that struggle, that tension from coming to higher ed as a corporate CFO and trying to figure out what on earth, how does this work here in higher ed? The typical CFO in the corporate world is responsible, like we talked about, financial strategy and planning, those big picture things, where Christian higher ed CFOs, we put everything on them that's not academic. So they're not only in charge of financial strategy and planning, but they're also in charge of the bookstore and food services and the dorms and legal and risk management and all of the auxiliaries and all of that other stuff. You need 12 degrees to be a higher ed CFO. It's not right, but it is what it is. And it's universal across higher ed, not just Christian higher ed. I would also dare say higher ed, one of the big differences, one of the biggest struggles that I had was decisions are made by a committee. Out there in the corporate world, if you're the CFO and it's a CFO question, the CFO makes a decision and that's what happens. Everyone jumps right to it. Not in higher ed. That was a big struggle for me. I learned that one the hard way.
Yeah, I think a negative term, paralysis by analysis, right?
Paralysis by analysis, absolutely.
Yep. What else?
Oh, goodness. I would say another big struggle for me is the corporate world is run by business professionals. Yeah. The higher ed world is run by academics. Completely different way of thinking. Yeah. And it's overcomable and manageable. It's not a bad thing. It just is what it is.
It's more of an awareness. And I think for presidents who are hiring CFOs from outside, it's not that you shouldn't hire from outside higher education. There certainly is the opportunity there. But recognize what they can the value that they can bring from an outside perspective coming in from that business side of it. And you're exactly right. Even our large institutions, the CFOs, their plate of responsibility is broad. And it's not just on the financial aspect of it and planning and whatever else. It's physical plant. And a lot of times HR is also put under the auspices of the CFO. So
IT, financial aid.
Yeah.
Here at ABACC, we do a new business officers training program, and it's 12 modules and those things we've just listed, because we're trying to help CFOs understand the giant picture that is your role as a CFO. It's really, really tough. And unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, I don't know, any Christian higher ed CFO could quit their job, get a job down the street, work half the hours for twice the pay. But most of Christian higher ed CFOs are doing it out of the love for their institution.
Exactly. And fulfilling a calling like you shared, right? Because you could be making double the money half the time, but you still have that empty void that you're not contributing to something bigger than yourself. So
not that that's an excuse to pay people half the price, but it is what it is.
Of course. I got you there. One of the most critical relationships when we're talking about now the CFO enrolling in higher education, one of the most critical relationships is between the CFO and the president. Share with us ways that both presidents and CFOs can use to make sure that relationship is as strong as possible.
Number one, communicate a lot and well. And like I said before, if you're not good at communicating, learn. Take some classes, attend some webinars, talk to your peers, communicate well. All the good and all the bad. Extremely honest, right out there, without shame. Communicate with your president. Your president should never be surprised by anything you ever say out loud in public, whether it's good or bad. I would also say, deeply understand the priorities of your president. Get to know what his or her priorities are, and support those priorities. Do what you can to be a resource to your president. In spite of all the good and all the bad, be respectful, be professional. Remember that you work for your president, not the other way around. And again, don't forget your role and your job and what your job is.
Yeah, yeah. So a couple good things there for sure in that relationship, and because a CFO is like that, where if an institution has gone off or something bad has happened, a lot of times it revolves around finances. So a lot of times the first person to find out about something like that would be a CFO, and whether it's intentional or unintentional, having a relationship of trust with the president to be able to have those lines of communication are absolutely necessary. And it's part of the job. You have to do it. So president's listening. How's your relationship with your CFO? Or do you have a good, strong relationship where that individual is providing you the information and the perspective that is needed? And I'd say for CFOs that are listening, if you don't feel like you have that relationship with the president, reach out, because it's absolutely critical that you have a strong relationship with your president, for sure.
And we spend time on that here at ABACC in all kinds of various ways through webinars and different training opportunities that we have. And we talk about the CFO presidential relationship quite a bit. It's very, very important.
Yeah. So that's up, right? That's the relationship between the CFO and the president. Now talk to us about, because typically a CFO is sitting on a president's cabinet or leadership team or executive leadership team with colleagues. Talk to us about how a CFO can effectively lead peers when they work on such a leadership team with other VPs.
Well, it's a tough one for sure. It takes actual effort. It doesn't happen naturally, I don't believe. But I would say the same as I would say about your relationship with your president. Communicate, and especially when you're communicating with cabinet peers. Remember, they're not financial people. They don't necessarily understand the lingo. They don't necessarily understand all the charts and graphs that you're so deeply in love with. Communicate in very real ways. And individually, each person is going to need you to communicate in a different way. And it's the same as I would say for the relationship between a CFO and a president. Understand the priorities and the responsibilities of your peers and support them. Be a resource to them. And like we've already talked about, at the bottom of it all, be open and honest and truthful. Don't always be the no guy. It's probably my final word. Don't be the one who says, nope, can't do it, can't afford it. Let's talk about it. Let's find solutions. Yep. Let's work together.
Well, and while that may be the reality, you don't want to be pegged as the person who's always the no person. No, can't be done. Yeah. So a couple things in that working with peers that I think you raised that are so critical. I think one of the things you mentioned that we tend to gloss over is that not everybody understands financials. And CFOs hold power. One of the sources of power, it's not limitless, but is finances. And I've seen situations where CFOs have kind of used that and the language of CFOs to kind of put themselves as the expert and to kind of use terms to keep everybody away. But the opposite should be true for the CFO. They should be helping colleagues understand how to read a balance sheet. There are assumptions that you make that people around the table fully understand what an audit is, how to effectively budget, how to read a monthly budget. As a CFO, you can be proactive and you can actually help educate your colleagues in all of those terms. I've been in those situations where, somebody, you're all reading a budget report and it's like, I just don't understand how this is, but I don't want to be the person to say, I don't understand what this says, right?
And why would you? Why would you, when you're a PhD in biblical theology, why would you understand how to read a financial statement?
Yeah.
For anything beyond a basic level.
Yeah. And my encouragement to leaders who are not the CFO, who aren't the president, or colleagues maybe around the table, reach out to the CFO, take him or her to coffee, take him to lunch, and have them explain to you, how to read an audited statement or how to read a balance sheet. And I think the CFO would feel valued in that process. That what I know is very important. Another piece I'd love for you to speak into, and I think it's a great practice for CFOs, is whenever you're in a group context, try to avoid surprises.
Oh, yes.
So talk to us about that as a CFO is relating to colleagues, the value of making sure that no one is surprised around the table.
Boy, I've seen that firsthand. I have probably committed that atrocity firsthand in my early days. Bad choice.
Yeah.
Whether it's any bad news that you need to share should never be shared first in a public place. Yeah. Share it with the people involved and talk about it, and make sure that everybody's on the same page and go in together to whatever public meeting you're going into as a united front.
Yeah.
Always be a united front.
Yeah. And especially that goes with presidents. You never want to surprise a president in a group setting.
No.
If you're seeing something financially or something that is of concern to you, that's a conversation directly with the president. And I would say the same holds true with your colleagues. And the institution where I previously had worked, that was a practice by the CFO that if the CFO was going to raise something, it wasn't that they weren't going to raise it or asking my permission, because they didn't report to me, but would just give me a heads up to say, hey, just so you know, in my report at the cabinet, I'm going to bring up X, Y, or Z. Am I missing anything as I'm looking at this, or to even work towards solutions? So you're eliminating the surprise factor, because the last thing you want are people around the table defensive and embarrassed. And
it puts everybody in a defensive position immediately when it's a surprise.
It does, and it just kills trust. It really does around the table. And
like we've talked about, the CFO should be strategizing, and nothing should just pop up an hour before your cabinet meeting.
Yeah.
These are discussions that should have been happening all along.
Yeah.
If you're watching the trends, if you're doing financial planning, if you're strategizing, nothing should be terribly surprising unless something super unusual happens.
Yeah, which is a good point to the CFOs. If you're always providing surprises, maybe the fingers are pointing back at you as to your effectiveness in the position. Well, Bruce, this has been a great conversation. We have just a couple of minutes left. We have emerging leaders who listen to our show. Mm-hmm. What's one final word of advice that you'll give to any listeners who are thinking about a career path towards becoming a CFO?
Number one word, connection.
Yeah.
Connects to your peers, connects to your president, connect to your coworkers, connect to the workers that provide support to you, those that are underneath you, connect to your board. Connection. Mm. Too many CFOs work in isolation. And a lot of CFOs are kind of accountant types, and they tend to just kind of have their head down and moving their stacks of coins from one pile to another. Doesn't work.
Yeah.
And it's not effective, and it will always turn out badly.
Yeah.
Connection. Yeah. Number one.
Yeah. Is there an internal career track for CFOs that you've seen in higher education? I mean, do you see them moving on into president's roles?
Yeah, I've seen it. I think it can work in the right situation. It's an unusual situation where that might work.
Yeah.
Very rare, but I've seen that happen. Yeah. I've seen it happen poorly, and I've seen it happen really well.
Yeah. Well, really appreciate you, Bruce, and it was a fantastic conversation. Really appreciate you sharing your wisdom and experiences with us today.
Oh, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. And if you'd like more information about ABACC, and if your institution is not a member of ABACC, I would really encourage you to check out on the show description. We've put a link there to the ABACC website, as well as Bruce's contact information if you want to reach out directly to Bruce to have a conversation with him. Just a tremendous, valuable resource, and we trust that this was a helpful podcast for you as you lead at your institution. So until next time, stay kingdom focused.